Graffiti in the late 90s was my greatest passion in life, and the idea of having to stop tagging, especially because I got busted and my mom was on me, was something that horrified me. However, by the end of my time as an active writer, it wasn't uncommon for me to get on a bus, mean mug a driver, tag right in that driver's face, and almost beg them to call the police. Needless to say, this is a huge jump in mentality. And you might be asking, how the hell does somebody like me, who is very preoccupied with keeping this thing a secret and not getting busted, also end up doing a bunch of hot stuff all the time? And I can tell you guys that there were a lot of logical progressions along the way to turn me this way, and I was far from the only writer in the city or in my circle that was this way. But before discussing my own personality shifts or those of the people around me, let's get into what it truly means to be hot as a writer. In its simplest terms, being hot is doing stuff that attracts unwanted attention, and especially unwanted attention from the authorities. There's a whole spectrum of behaviors that encapsulate being hot, and I've seen many of them myself. And the easiest way for you to make a situation hot, not only for yourself, but for everybody around you, is to be very careless when you're tagging. I saw this with people I knew personally almost every day that I wrote. These folks almost seemed to prefer if somebody there was watching them, somebody there was getting angry, especially while they tagged, they would just tag more. But how you tag, how you go out there and lay tags down in the world can also bring a lot of heat. I've talked previously about etch, and in the 2000s, that was an absolutely great way to bring a lot of heat to yourself and put a lot of pressure on yourself and the people around you. But even if you didn't use etch, if you just went out into the streets and saturated block after block every single night, at some point it was gonna catch up. But in addition to these kind of acts that almost served as a challenge to the system, writers did a bunch of other stuff, and a lot of times minor stuff, to generate heat. And in terms of some of these more so minor acts, it could be something as straightforward as just getting on the bus with a bunch of other writers, but also getting on the bus with your radio, maybe using a substance on the bus, or just being on that bus hella loud, yelling, clowning folks. You're gonna get a lot of attention. And given that doing any of these things all produces pretty crappy outcomes, you might wonder why we wanted to be hot in the first place. And I can tell you, for a lot of us, it was how we wanted to be perceived. Especially, we wanted to be seen as people that were gonna go into any environment, lay tags down, and not care about the consequences. However, I can also add that as bus hoppers, we had a pretty naturally aggressive stance towards authority. And public displays of defiance were almost expected of you. And anytime you got into a situation, especially with a bus driver, you were expected to plant your feet and stand your ground and not let this person disrespect you. And anybody acting counter to this was probably getting clowned. They're gonna be looked at as soft, and they were gonna have a lot of insinuations around their name that could have turned into some real consequences. They could have had some foul stuff happen to them. They were looked at as soft, so a lot of people went along with the program. And going along with this program, and especially being around people who expected you to act hot, was how a lot of writers who otherwise wouldn't act hot started so. Going to a school like Everett that had a lot of taggers allowed me to see how people were both pre and post tagging. And some of the folks that got involved in graffiti were genuinely very mellow people. They were low key, they'd be quiet in class, they did their homework, and they just kind of stayed out the way. And despite the fact that these kids were responsible and well behaved, they were still growing up in poverty. And they were still subject to the same things that the rest of us were subject to, and possibly even more so because they were well behaved. So if they didn't want to have certain B words or H words attached to their name, they might have to step out of their comfort zone and act a little reckless. And if you're hanging out with a bunch of reckless people anyway, it's a lot easier for you to bridge that gap and become reckless yourself. It's also a lot easier to bridge this gap if you tag every day. I've already done a video about the effects on your life and your personality as someone who tags every day, so I won't go too further in depth. But I can say just doing something illegal every single day takes away a bit of that apprehension you have about doing illegal stuff. And if you're a good kid, you're a responsible kid, your mind might not even be geared towards the consequences of what you're doing. And to you, it just might seem like good fun. It might just seem like you're hanging out with your friends and you're not even fully cognizant of what you're getting yourself involved in. And usually you only get the first hint of what you've gotten yourself involved in when you get busted, especially when you get busted for being hot. And of all the places to get caught tagging, getting caught tagging on a bus was probably the best one. And because of this, it makes sense that we acted the hottest on buses. By nature, just to get up, we were gonna have to do something hot in hitting up on a bus. And day in, day out, if this is what you're doing, especially if you're around people that are doing even hotter stuff, it's very easy for you to lull yourself just into that routine, and maybe that routine catches up. I'll also add that when I would see these types of writers that weren't naturally aggressive take on the behavior of their friends, they stayed like that for the time they wrote. But some of you guys might be wondering, if these types of writers weren't already hot and they had to learn it from somebody else, how did the people that they learned it from become hot? And I can tell you that these writers a lot of times had already been getting in trouble years before they ever started writing. These were the types of kids back in like first grade, second grade, third grade that would come into class, make a big disturbance, yell, maybe throw something, slam a book on the table, and just do other kind of attention-seeking behavior. These types of kids especially had a lot of confrontations with teachers. You'd see them screaming, cursing teachers out, being like 7, 8 years old and threatening violence. And sometimes when the parents of these kids would have to come to school and deal with the teachers, you would understand very fast why this kid was the way they were. Sometimes you would see these parents come to school intoxicated and already either beefing with the teacher or beefing with their kid. You hear a lot of screaming, you hear a lot of swear words, you hear a lot of threats especially threats towards their own children. And you hear this parent talking about how they were gonna beat the absolute crap out of their kid with whatever weapon they felt like using, and the kid would just be sitting there numb. And hearing one of these parents talking about their kids, you didn't have to think all that much to understand that this person didn't care about their kid, didn't care about where their kid went, possibly didn't even care if their kid lived or not. And with a couple of exceptions, the people I knew that regularly did hot stuff and did very aggressive, stupid stuff came from this kind of background. When it comes to putting somebody's family background out there, I really don't want to do that, so I'm not going to name the person who this applies to, but if this person hears this, just understand I'm not clowning you. I think it's up what happened to you. But I was talking to a mutual friend of this writer one day, and I told this friend that I saw that dude up constantly. I saw him doing walk downs all the time on the 24, and I could go to Geneva in Mission, I could go to First in Mission, or really any place in between, see this person running. And this friend told me, yeah, that guy's out pretty much all night and all he ever does is just tag. And when I asked my friend if this fool was sneaking out of the house every single night to go bomb, he told me he didn't have to. When I heard this, I was like, damn, that's dope. His mom doesn't care if he's bombing. I wish my mom didn't care. I didn't know that my friend was in a similar situation, and effectively by the time he was 20, both of his parents had abandoned him. And this dude looked me dead in the face and told me, trust me, Connor, you want your mom to care. But without knowing this dude all that well, only seeing him in passing and never talking to him about the things that bothered him, I can't say what his motivations were. But when I would see this dude in the late 90s doing his thing, screwing with bus drivers, stealing transfers, and especially stealing jackets, I always had love for it. And when I would see this writer doing this thing, the idea of getting caught, getting busted, having some consequences for what he was doing never seemed to enter his mind. And I wouldn't be surprised if these thoughts didn't enter his mind because this dude might have gotten busted a bunch of times already. And for sure, one of the ways that a writer's behavior can become more aggressive and more defiant is there not being any concrete consequences to them getting busted. Mind you, what's a concrete consequence is very different to a lot of people. And to a lot of people, getting a $500 ticket would be enough to say, I'm falling back, I don't want any further problems. But there's other people out there that the prospect of maybe doing a year or 2 years in prison means nothing to them. And sadly, some of the things that they're coming from, especially some of the abuse that they're enduring, might be more severe than some time in jail. Thus, if they go to jail and it's kind of a kickback experience, especially if they know a lot of people in there already, they're not going to be scared to go back. And for fools I've personally known, this lack of fear of getting apprehended results in them spending a significant amount of their life locked up. And when you're a teenager, your impulse control is almost zero, but if you add the fact that you're not scared to go to jail, it's gonna have you doing a lot of crazy stuff. And when I would see fools acting in this way, in my mind, that's what made somebody hot. And the stuff that I was doing didn't compare. But that's not to say I wasn't a hot writer myself. I absolutely was. And with the exception of hiding graffiti from my mom, I didn't hide graffiti from anybody else, especially as I got deeper and deeper into tagging. And by the later end of my time as a writer, I wasn't looking out for the people I should have been looking out for. I wasn't looking out for what the bus driver was doing. And whether this fool was looking at me or not, whether this fool was on me or not, or threatened me or not, I didn't care. I was getting up. And if you ask me, how did you get this way, Connor? Were you one of these fools that was influenced by his boys, or were you already acting this way before you tagged? I would tell you, I was the second one. I started getting in trouble in school in 2nd grade when I had my first fist fight. But being an ostracized kid, a poor kid, a kid without any kind of family connections, I stayed getting into fights from 2nd until 11th grade. And when I'd be at school and kids would make fun of me, they try to bully me, and I get into these situations, I get blamed for them. And with the school having no response to what was happening to me, it made the school a target as well. I can also say that similar things were going on in my house, and I learned to defend myself from pretty much anybody in my vicinity from the age of about 7 onward. My father being a raging alcoholic and my mother being the breadwinner in the house, always being tired, always just being kind of overwhelmed from being at work, also meant I was struggling to get acknowledgement. And long before I was causing scenes on buses, being hot, and just being stupid to drivers, and being very stupid at school. But I can say bus drivers acting not all that different from teachers caused me to act even dumber on buses. And that's because when I would get on a bus with my friends from my neighborhood, the bus drivers wouldn't hide their disdain. They'd look at us and talk to us and treat us like we were burdens and like they needed to be paid more just to deal with a bunch of kids like us. Mind you, this behavior was aimed towards kids who were 10 or 11 years old and weren't doing anything aside from just existing and riding the bus. And by the time I started tagging, I was already getting treated like crap by bus drivers, so the idea of throwing some crap back at bus drivers greatly appealed to me. And if I could piss off an authority figure, especially a teacher or a bus driver, and get some props on top of it, that was gonna be the way I proceeded, and I did. And I can tell you guys that this was very conscious behavior on my part. It was something I cultivated, and it was something I presented knowingly. But for the people I knew that did the hottest stuff, that did the craziest stuff, they were this way and didn't even know it. And these riders had some very serious undiagnosed issues that they were struggling with, but some of them didn't even know that they were struggling. To them, it was just life. And that's the biggest difference that I encountered between people like myself and people like my homeboy W. And I remember a couple weeks back, I was chopping it up with my mom and the homeboy W came up. And when we were talking about this fool, we were specifically talking about how he acted. And for you guys that don't know, when me and the homeboy K would go bombing with W, we would ask him to do really stupid stuff that would get him locked up. And this fool would just giggle and then do it right after. I don't know how many times this fool got busted in my presence. I saw him get chased by the police. I saw him have a lot of problems, but this fool didn't seem to understand any of it was happening. In turn, my mom wondered if the homeboy W had fetal alcohol syndrome. And it's one of my biggest regrets, not only as a writer, but just as a human being, to be around the homeboy W, who's pretty defenseless, and get him to do stupid crap like this. I can't say we only suggested this fool to do stupid crap like this in the first few months that we knew him. And past that point, he was just our boy. We'd just kick it with this fool and we go bombing with him. But seeing what this fool's home life was like, let me know that even without this issue, without this thing that maybe he didn't have control over, he's probably gonna end up acting crazy anyway. And at that time, I was not an empathetic person. I was committing a lot of crimes outside of Graph that required me to suspend my empathy or just not employ it, period. But seeing how my boy was living was saddening. And the amount of neglect that my boy was experiencing was known even to the school. And I remember the next year in 10th grade, they subjected him to a bunch of tests. And they found out that this fool had all kinds of stuff going on with him, and almost none of it was being treated. And in San Francisco's Graph scene, you saw people like this everywhere. And naturally, given how much love I have for graffiti, I try to share a lot of the positive and just beautiful things I've experienced in this pursuit. But I gotta keep it funky with you guys about all the stuff that's really ugly too. And one of the saddest things that I have to contend with from that time is that undiagnosed mental illness probably inspired a lot of people's behavior, and undiagnosed mental illness completely permeated the scene. Almost all of us came from some kind of broken family, had family problems, experienced abuse, lived in poverty, or had something going on that we didn't understand. And even sadder, I know that a lot of these issues that these people had did not get worked out. And given specifically how many people we've lost to overdoses in the last couple of years just really spells it out of how much pain a lot of these writers were carrying around. And if we looked at this kind of behavior as a positive, it might have been the only place that these people experienced positive feedback, that got some love, and ultimately, it's really messed up that many of them probably felt like they had to do really dumb things and harmful things to get that love. And especially if you're carrying around any of these issues, acting hot and tagging on stuff isn't gonna fix it. But the relationships that you build in this thing called graph and the people that you meet that show you love and support you might help you out in your life. And given that most of us have some of this going on, or even all of it going on, it really makes me stress the need to treat each other better. But to be honest, this is a modern view that I have, and back in the 90s, I didn't feel this way. And back in the day when I saw all this kind of stuff, it was just something to celebrate and praise. But ultimately, in questioning why somebody would act this way, whether they did it because they were influenced, they did it because they felt like it, or they didn't even know that they were doing it, the only answers I find for our behavior are all logical.